Start recording. Okay. So here we have Marsha Richmond, who we talked about in our mock IEP meeting, although she just reminded me it wasn't actually an IEP meeting, but I did bend some of the things, although the issues were the same. So I have questions for both classes, but Christy, since you're our sole student, why don't we just start with whatever you want to ask? And then we'll look through the other questions, because I'm sure there are some good ones in there too.
Well, I wrote a question in my email. I have a couple of questions, but one of my questions was, do you think after like the progress you made with Benny, do you feel that your practice, your teaching practice changed?
That's a good question. Let me think. I think it gave me a greater comfort level with inclusion. It reinforced, I always was sort of flexible and went with how things played out. Like I never pre-planned, you know, like in the summer, how I was going to interface with any child, because you need to know the child, and it changes throughout the year as things happen. So I would say it reinforced to me that you need to do that, but it also reinforced and changed to some extent my sense of how important the parent piece is, and how it reminded me how anxiety provoking interactions can be for parents, and just kind of it made it all come to life in a different way. Not that it had never, not that that hadn't been an issue in the past. I mean, it happens, and it happened with me with my own kids. I mean, I knew that very well and always tried to be cognizant of that. But every time you have a new experience, it kind of reminds you that every person is different and handles it differently. I mean, one of the things in the situation with Benny was that I had been told that they really wanted him to have somewhat of a typical program. And then in meeting them and talking, I realized that wasn't their initial expectation. They wanted him to succeed in the environment of a classroom, to interface with kids, and to get as far as he could, but they didn't have the expectation that as far as he could was as far as in reality he could. Right, Diane? Is that kind of
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it also made me realize that sometimes you kind of have to be the tough one, which I didn't like that role. I didn't like feeling that I had come across that way, but in the end, I was very glad I had.
Right. So did you ever feel like so you were a gen ed teacher in a gen ed class, right? So,
yeah.
So like, do you ever feel like I work with a teacher now who's a gen ed, in a gen ed class, she's the gen ed teacher. And sometimes she gets students that she feels like it's beyond her capabilities to help, and she's like, but I'm not a special education teacher. Like, that's what she says, and that's how she feels. And she feels like, you know, these kids shouldn't be in her class. And do you ever, like, did you feel that way, or do you ever feel that way? Or is it kind of like, you know, there's, you know, even though it's a gen ed class, like, it's an even playing field, and like, we just have to do the best we can?
The latter. My feeling is that kids are kids, and that as a teacher, my job is to take any child from where they are to where I feel they can go. And I need to push them from where they're at. I can't push them all, you know, even in typical kids, they're not all coming in at the same point. I mean, and this was a second grade class. In second grade, you get kids who still aren't reading sometimes. And you get kids whose parents think they're ready to read Harry Potter when they're not. In terms of comprehension, they can read it, they can word read it, they can decode it, but they're not reading it. So you always have differentiated experiences. My very first year of teaching in the school where Benny was, I was a kid myself. And a parent came up to me and said, I just want you to know that my daughter already, this was a first grade class,
Mhm.
my daughter already is reading. And, you know, I know you're a new teacher. I really hope you're going to, know that she's reading. Well, by the end, and I said, of course I will. Everything's individual. In those days, the word was individualized instead of differentiated.
Mm.
And so I said, but by the end of the year, that child was not anywhere near the top of the class because she hadn't done all the typical nursery school things and kindergarten things. She hadn't done the science experiments and the block building because they were busy teaching her all about letters
Yeah.
and sounds. And I had another child who came in truly not reading one word, but was as bright as a whip. And at the end of the year, it was, both kids were bright, but at the end of the year, experiences are way more important. So, right from the beginning, I always kind of knew that you have to take kids where they're at, and you have to take parents where they're at, and bring all of them as forward as, move them as far as you can.
It's interesting though, because my perspective, which, my class certainly knows, and too, is I did feel, I think at the beginning that maybe you thought he didn't belong, or maybe he would be better someplace else. And maybe that was partly because I felt a little intimidated also that he was in in Marcia's class, because Marcia is the most academic teacher in the school. I mean, she does more in her second grade than most teachers do in their fifth grade. So I was a little bewildered. Why, it almost seemed like an accident. Why was this child placed in her class? So whether it was me reading into you or you wondering what I was thinking, I mean, I certainly did have that. And I've certainly seen that a lot as a teacher. And ever since my experiences with my son, now I do not see it at all. And, I have a child this year who the whole school, it was like, I felt they were all ganging up on him. For 2 years, they've been talking about getting him out of the school. And I just knew, when I get this kid, like, I'm going to prove them wrong, because I know that it doesn't matter what the IP says. It doesn't matter what the IQ is. Like, all kids can grow. And my supervisor is a little passive aggressively angry at me now because he's doing so well in my class. Like, she can't get him out now. But I don't care because, I know that, he has horrendous behavior. He was swinging from the door jamb the first day I walked in. He can't sit for more than 3 minutes, but I found even, the 3 minutes we've spread to 10, which is plenty. And within that 10, he can learn, and then he needs an outlet. And maybe by the end of the year, we'll be at 20, but he's learned enough that he's, has an 80 in my class, which is quite good for seventh grade math. But, all of that I learned, I think, more as a parent, even than as a graduate student in education. But I did think in the beginning that you questioned your ability to reach him or teach him.
I questioned, I didn't question whether he belonged there at all. I questioned how I was going to reach him. I don't know if ability is the right word. Certainly I took many special ed classes, but I didn't take a ton of them, and they predated anything that was current. So,
Right.
But I read a lot. So, and I stay on top of things. But I did question how I was going to do it, because I also had plenty of other kids in there who had many, many diverse needs. It was a tough group.
Well, so here's a question from one of my students, Amanda. I'm just going to throw it in. She asked, how are you able to work with Benny and increase his academic performance without taking away from the other students in the class who were at a higher level than him
Right.
Most of that year, if not the whole year?
Right. I think that what I found, and maybe some of it, maybe in thinking about it, I should say that a lot of it was what I learned through that year. I guess I probably did learn more than I said initially. Was that you have to figure out where it is that you want to start. So with Benny, I was just starting with things like, or actually this was even mid-year, things like raising his hand so that he'd participate. He started to notice that other kids were raising their hands. And so he'd raise his hand, and then I'd call on him, and he had nothing to say. So it doesn't take long. Once that's in my head, that that's something I want to work on, it doesn't necessarily take long. First of all, I can get you can talk to other kids, and get them to help him see that. I would use some of the discussions, like we always had compliments in web, like 2 or 3 times a week, where the kids started by saying something nice to somebody in the class, preferably someone they hadn't complimented 5 days in a row, trying to change it up a little, to notice things about kids. And then web was wonderfully exciting books. They'd share, about 5 kids each time would share their nighttime reading. And so during that time, I would sometimes get permission from kids to share something that they were having trouble with, whether it was, playing on the playground, feeling left out, whatever. So I asked Benny if it was okay with him if we talked about raising hands, things like that. So those things don't take time, and they are beneficial for everybody. So to learn, whether it's just learning compassion, whether it's learning that everybody learns differently, whether it's accepting that things that you may know, someone else doesn't know, and that's okay, and it doesn't make them better or worse. So doing a lot of that kind of community building. I also have always used kids to teach kids. That's one of the reasons why I don't like homogeneous groups, because kids really do learn from each other. So I'll often, I'll teach a math lesson, and I'll see, five faces that clearly are foggy. And I may only be able to interface with, say, 2 of them. So I'll take someone else, and often it's not the high kid, because they're not always able to explain because it came easily to them. I'll take somebody who needs the reinforcement, who has to think about it and learn by teaching, and I'll ask them together to work it out to see if they can help so-and-so learn it. So again, I'm not needed. I'm just needed to kind of direct the action. And I did the same thing with my teaching assistant, where I would, make a plan for who needed what, and then explain to her how I wanted her to do whatever it was that she was going to do. And she would do some of it. So I don't find it necessarily more time consuming. The time consuming is out of the classroom. In terms of the planning, like when you have a class where there's, one year I had a class literally with 12 high kids and 12 kids with major needs, and absolutely no one in the middle. And the high kids were like, okay, been there, done that, on to the next thing, no matter what I came up with. And can be pretty challenging. No matter what I came up with, they'd finish it quickly and need more. So I used to be so grateful that I didn't have little kids at home anymore, because I was there for hours every day, planning things, pulling books together.
Leaving in the dark, leaving in the dark, which I know because I lived on the block.
Right. So, and that's the kind of thing with Benny or anyone else. I mean, I would make a worksheet or some plan that he could do for something that he'd be able to do, or that he could do with a partner. But I don't want to exaggerate. It definitely is time consuming and harder. The more kids with needs that you have, obviously it is, but you learn how to balance it. And I really don't like the notion. I don't like hearing teachers say it takes away from the other kids, because to me, one of the best things about inclusion is that it's helping us to raise kids who are compassionate and understand that everybody has something to offer and aren't fearful of people who are different, and are my definition of human being. And I think that they learn that in inclusion. I've seen a tremendous gain in that regard since I experienced inclusion.
So that kind of fits into this question from Kristen Corbo, which she asks, is it complicated to have the students build relationships with one another? So if the children notice that some students may be different, or if children see that a student is different, or either socially or intellectually, how do you deal with that, and how do you help them get past that and form relationships within your class?
Okay, again, I was always very open. I felt that it's important for kids to hear descriptions, and sometimes I would do it without the child present because I would never want to run the risk of offending somebody. So like when I had the kids, we have a Downs class. When I'd have some of the Downs kids included, in the early days before the kids were familiar with having them in school, really later on, I didn't have to do anything because they knew them from first grade and from kindergarten. But I would talk to them about kids having different needs, and that everybody, some of them need some of them are really good readers but don't understand what they read, and they need to work on that. And someone else has trouble with math, and someone else has trouble drawing. And I would always say to them, I think I have 15 thumbs on my hands because I cannot draw to save my life. And I don't love running around. Should, but I will always talk about things that I do well, things that I don't do well, things that I feel good about, things that I don't. And I would find something that everybody was really good at. The first time I had a Downs child in my class, she was the very first one to understand the compliments thing that we did. Where we would, I said we would, just go in a circle. I'd have like a block or whatever that we pass, so it was somebody else's turn, and they could pass. And in the beginning, everybody passed until Teresa. And Teresa didn't give the best compliment. I wanted something more internal and more, intellectual, but she said, "I like your dress," to somebody. That was the first person in the entire class who was ready to say anything. That was also my first experience with inclusion of any kind. And I was blown away. I was absolutely blown away. So then if I was talking in the future, I could talk about, remember, Teresa was the one who understood the compliments first.
And was brave enough to
Say it, exactly. I talk a lot about shyness, the kids as something that I was painfully shy as a child. And I talk about how hard that is, and that I might have been good in school things, but I wasn't good in knowing how to talk to people. So, and I always get permission, but I ask kids if we can share some of their feelings and some of that so that we talk about that. So I found that they really started to see the human parts of everybody. They also love kids, little kids. This is, again, it's not high school, it's not middle school. It may be different. I never taught, I had a little experience with middle school kids, and through tutoring, I've had some high school kids, but it's not the same thing. So I got them to, they want to be helpful. And so if you say to them, would you like to go sit and eat at Teresa's table so that you can get to know the other kids in her class? They'll all, me first. And then occasionally there are some kids that are reticent, and I would talk to them privately about what were their issues. I would also share with them that as a child, we had an EMR class in my school that was in the basement. It was absolutely, when I think back on it, it was revolting. And I would see these kids, some of them drooling and whatever, walking past, and I was petrified. And one day a mother rang our doorbell, something for PTA, and brought her son who was in that class with her. And I ran up to my room. I think I thought it was contagious. I don't know what I thought. And, my mother had no clue what was wrong with me. Why, she probably just assumed I was still being shy. It came up in discussion, and she said, "You're kidding. You were afraid." Yeah, I was petrified. So, because nobody talked to us about these things. We didn't understand it, and we had no exposure to it except occasionally walking in the hall. So I share those kinds of experiences with the kids, and I tell them how proud I am that they're so comfortable with everybody, that they like all people, and it just grows from there. I didn't find that a tremendously big problem. Not to say that they were never unkind kids, because there were. And I always, basically, if I couldn't do it with discussion and everything else, I would simply say, the buck stops here. You're not allowed to behave this way in school. I can't change what you think and feel. But in school, we all treat people with respect.
It's funny because my younger son also had Marcia, and he's ADHD. He happens to have epilepsy, but for school purposes, aside from, he doesn't pay attention, but he does very well. Like, he doesn't have, you wouldn't look at him and say this is a kid with special needs. He's a strong student, and we talk a lot about inclusion in the house. Because of my other son, and I do presentations and things like that. And in 4th grade, he started asking me, what this school does is, Elan was, actually his name is Elan. I call him Benny in the book and on printed things, but he's asking me why, because he presents with me. So I guess I could just go use his name. Now he's old enough to give permission. He's happy to be a role model for change and, social order, social justice. But Aaron started asking me why the children with Down syndrome go back to their classroom at lunchtime, or first come to the classroom in the afternoon, because they have kind of like a pretty much a half day, or at most half day, that the children in the court classes spend in the regular class. And I never wanted to answer him. I wanted to kind of, also I didn't know what to say, because I'm very pro full inclusion. So if it were up to me, ideally, I would like to see them get all their services in the general ed class. I think there's something, but yet they do a great job having, half-day inclusion. So I let him kind of bounce it around without answering it. And then toward the end of 4th grade, and this is a kid who really is, brilliant in many ways, said to me, I'm still trying to figure out why they go back to their room. Is it because they're misbehaving? At first I thought it was because they don't behave well, but they behave much better than some of the kids that stay all day. And then he said, but I think I finally figured it out. I think it's because they're allergic to cheese. So they can stay until lunch, and then so many kids eat cheese. It's not like peanut butter, which nobody eats. So they go back to their room. It's the kids who are allergic to cheese. And, it was so delightful that here's this kid, like and some of them drool and they act to what looks somewhat inappropriate, but he did not clue into that. And then one of his best friends, Teddy, who's actually going to be at the Saturday event that you're coming to, so you'll see him.
Oh, good. Good.
So there's another little boy who is the oldest of 4, and he just, a very cool kid, good in sports, but he just took to hanging out with the core kids, and so much so that he won an award. And as he got the award in 5th grade, it was the person who gave the award basically said, like, you spend your lunch hour with the core kids. And both Aaron and Teddy, I was talking to them later, like, they didn't even understand why one should get an award for that. And really, why should one? I mean, these are his friends. He wanted to be with them. So he went to see them at lunch, and he helped at dismissal when they were coming out of the school. And that's really a measure of what a wonderful elementary school program they had, where, the adults are still looking at it as something that they have to be grateful for. They have to be grateful for this child who gave his time to these kids. And for him, there was nothing to be grateful about. He just, in fact, my son was paired with 2 of the core kids in the entry dance. They have this ballroom dance show. And honestly, even I felt a little like pride that, they picked my son to be with these kids. And Teddy was jealous because he wanted to be with them. So, there was really, it's just so different from the minds of children. We can't help it. We're, as much as we try to be completely open and completely pro-inclusion and completely evolved, I think we're kind of a product of this kind of bad upbringing we've had. But the kids don't see it that way at all. And unfortunately, in the middle school, the core kids are completely separate. And Aaron never sees them, and Teddy never sees them. And the only way to see them is to join Best Buddies, which conflicts with everything else. So, it's kind of a shame, because they started something really good, and, in my mind, they're not continuing it, but I'm sure there are lots of arguments that, people have both ways.
I don't know if it's a matter of arguments. I think it's all about time. I really do. I think that by then it's a matter of time. It's and what skills kids need to learn.
Right, but kids need to learn to get along with everybody in the same way.
No,
they
I
need
agree
to,
with you. I meant what skills the Downs kids needed to learn that really the other kids don't have time. See, in elementary school, if I use a little bit of time to do something that's not quite on their level, I can come up with, every lesson has 10 different reasons why I'm doing it. So there are always one or two reasons for every child. So there is, despite the craziness with the standards and everything else, there is time. But as the curriculum gets more and more intense, it's harder and harder to fit things in that don't fit at all, that don't fit naturally. And I don't disagree with you, Diane. I think it would be a wonderful model if we could figure out how to do it. But I think the problem is the teachers feel so frazzled and so pressured by these
that's partly the standards. It's partly New York State with the regencies, which though they don't start till, well, here they start in 8th grade, I think start dictating the curriculum and the pace as early as 6th grade. I have another question here from Jillian, who asks, and I hope the answer isn't me. My question is, have you ever had any difficult experiences with parents? A parent that had a student with special needs? Have you ever tried to work with a parent who is unwilling or unable to give full support to their child at home, and how did you deal with that?
There are parents who are unable. I don't think that, I can't think of a parent who was unwilling.
Right.
But
certainly unable to help with the curriculum.
Who were unable. I mean, even in 2nd grade math.
I know, they ring my bell. I have parents at my doorstep from the block walking home from covert asking for help with 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade math.
Yeah, no, it's completely insane. So you have parents who can't. I mean, even now with my tutoring, I have a very difficult kid who shuts down very easily. I work with her and her sister at the same time. And
hello, is someone just joining by phone? Hello? Okay, you could probably keep talking. It looks like someone's trying to join.
Yeah, I see the phone icon.
But she's not quite connecting.
Okay. This family really doesn't have the wherewithal. First of all, they don't understand the math at all. And this kid also happens to be in 2nd grade and her sister's in 4th grade. So they really can't handle that math. But they also don't know how to structure the home to minimize the kids' outbursts. And so, I try, and then they'll text me and say, I'm so sorry. And all I can do is reinforce them and tell them I understand it's not easy. Every child is different, and she'll come out of it. And together I try to help them to understand what would be a better structure for them at home, so that maybe she could understand what they expect of her and how to kind of give her choices, not just yell at her when she's not complying, how to say to her, you can either do this or this. So, but it's a tough situation with parents in the context of covert. It was the same thing. I mean, sometimes I would say to parents, please call me if you don't understand the homework. I would handle a lot of it by saying, I'm in school in the morning. The kids can come and do the homework with me. If they can't do it, just tell them to tell me. I don't even require notes. I mean, unless it's a kid you rarely have a kid in 2nd grade who really consistently doesn't do homework. That would be a different situation. But normally I want the kids to get into the habit of being responsible for their own work. And so I'd say, just tell them to try. And if they don't understand, send it back. If they can't do it, come back to me and we'll work on it. But there are always parents who aren't happy with how you do everything. I once had a parent who, in retrospect, was right about something. I had made a comment about asking a child to be neater in her notebook. Not, it wasn't on a piece of paper that was loose. And so every time she opened the notebook, she saw that comment. And here I thought I was writing I used to write novels, to the kids, like positive things, reinforcing, you can do it, you can this. But the information was all there, and the child, I think probably the parent was humiliated by it, and maybe the child was as well, but she was right. And I said to her later, I said, I realized you were right, but she kind of never forgave me the whole year. And it was ironic because she had requested me. She loved me when I had her son. So it was, it is what it is. Does that answer it, Diane, do you think?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions about co-teaching because we just finished 2 weeks speaking about co-teaching. And I know, let me just explain to the class who's going to watch this later and to Christy, Rockville Center has kind of a slightly different model of co-teaching. Any student that has a child with a disability, and at Covert School, almost every elementary class has a handful of kids with disabilities. They all have a full-time teacher and a full-time teaching assistant. So the teaching assistant in our district, they're always certified teachers who are
not always.
Not always? Oh, I thought the aides were sometimes not, but most of the time.
aides never are.
They never are. But I thought most of the time they are. Not all the time.
Most of the teaching assistants, many of the teaching assistants are. They definitely are not all.
Okay.
And the contract reads that you only need 2 years of college.
Okay.
That's been changed.
So in some way, I think it's a switch from the city, which requires 2 full-time teachers in an inclusion class. However, because every classroom is potentially an inclusion class, the numbers are much smaller. I mean, I think you have at most, 4 kids with IEPs in a class, maybe 5, sometimes only 1 or 2. But I have a lot of
sometimes more. They will include, you can have up to 6 inclusion kids plus other kids with IEPs that are not defined as inclusion, that are resource room. They're defined as resource room. But they rarely will do as many as 6. But now with budget constraints, they are changing it up a little bit.
Because it saves them the teaching assistants.
Right.
So any room that has the inclusion kids needs to have a teaching assistant. Sometimes they have an aide also. And then there's a special education teacher who is shared with all the teachers on the grade. So depending on the IEP, she pulls them out, she pushes in. Is that correct? Like
we don't have as many special ed teachers as that. So it's more than
they would cover K-2.
Basically, they'll set up, they'll take the total number of kids in the building and they'll figure out the most efficient way to divide the kids up so that they get maximum time in whatever classrooms have to be serviced.
So I guess the question is, how do you use your teaching assistants? And do you use them as a co-teacher? Do you break the children up into groups in different ways, heterogeneous, homogeneous, at different times? Do you do parallel teaching, alternative teaching?
In theory, now I can only speak for what I do.
Of course.
I know that teaching assistants are not, I know for a fact, are not always used the way they're intended to be used.
Right. And neither are co-teachers always used the way they're intended to be used.
Right. So what I did, and what my understanding of what should be done, is that I would do a lot of grouping. And that was part of my hours after school, was deciding who was going to be grouped how. And sometimes it was homogeneous, often it was heterogeneous groups, depending on the subject, material, whatever. And I changed the groups up a lot so the kids would get to know other people and learn, or, it would be interesting in many ways. My teaching assistant would have a group. There were times that I had teaching assistants who were certified teachers, although they hadn't had their own classrooms yet. They they would sometimes, if they wanted to, they certainly could teach in small groups, because even the ones who weren't certified had to sometimes teach in small groups. But I would let them, if they wanted to, I would let them, teach a lesson. But I was always uncomfortable with that, because I felt that they don't, not that I didn't trust them necessarily, they don't get paid to be teachers. And there is a major union issue that I see, as that if teaching assistants do teaching, I can see a world where a district that doesn't have the money will say, okay, 1 teacher, 2 classrooms, 2 teaching assistants, and let the teaching assistants who are certified teachers but aren't getting paid as certified teachers do the work. So I was always reluctant to do too much of that, but I didn't want them to be bored or feel that I didn't trust them. So it was really, and certainly anytime I was pulled out for a meeting at CSE, a conference, they covered. And, I had a good relationship, so we talk about it, what they wanted to do. But certainly in small groups, even the ones who weren't teachers taught. We have a guided reading program. So during that period, there were 4 adults in the room. So 3, my teaching assistant, 2 other teaching assistants, and me. So we would have, and that was usually homogeneous grouping. Not always, but often homogeneous grouping. And I would make the plans for all the groups. Basically, I would select the books. Now, a lot of teachers had the TAs do that. And I felt, again, I didn't want it to be fly by the seat of the pants planning and choosing which books, because they wouldn't be expected to stay after school. It's just not fair. So I was a little bit more, I don't know if you call it anal, controlling, or planning. I don't know if it's good quality or bad qualities, but I took charge of that. And I would type, like Friday before I would leave, I would type up plans for each group, what I wanted them to cover. And, certainly they could ask whatever questions they wanted, things like that, but they knew what the expectation was, whether we were working on making inferences, whether and how I wanted them to cover it. And then I would always introduce the skill beforehand. Hey guys.
Hi. Hi.
Then I would always introduce the skill beforehand. And then they would, reinforce it in the groups. My other teaching assistant, again, it depended if it was a certified teacher or not. My teaching assistant that I had my last few years before I retired really couldn't do math, had a tremendously difficult time. So she would work on other things and I would have to do all the math. But there was always things, I would use her time very carefully. It was never just, you go do the paperwork. That was never, I took it home if necessary. She was always interfacing with kids, always, whether it was playing a game, a learning game with them, whether it was listening to somebody read, whether it was working on spelling or on some kind of a skill, social, whatever it was. I would find things that she was good at that she could work with groups on, so that I could work with groups on math and things like that. So that's basically how we worked, but mostly I did the teaching. The group teaching, the whole group teaching, I did, 95% of it.
Okay, so I promised Marcia 45 minutes to an hour, but I did promise that she could say hello to her former students here. And
if there are more questions, Diane, I don't mind.
Okay, so let them say hello quickly.
If it's not boring.
Okay.
But let me just say hello to.
Just say hello.
Hi.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Fine.
Good.
I can't wait. I'm going to see you on the 25th. I can't wait.
Oh, you are? Oh, yeah, at the bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really excited for it too.
Yeah. All right. You've been working hard.
We have school off tomorrow.
I know. I know you do.
You know if cohort does?
What? Oh, do I know? Yes. Yes. Everybody does. Everybody has school off tomorrow.
Except, I don't know. Do you have school?
I don't know.
Your mom has said she hasn't heard yet, but she doesn't have school. She won't be. I mean, unless my husband thinks the storm's going to end up being a big bust. that it's
Oh,
gonna,
no.
everybody
You
is
mean a
busy
bust?
planning for a bust means that it won't really be a terrible storm. But if it's really a terrible storm, your mom won't be able to get there.
But school's gonna be canceled for
Yours will be
us
canceled
already.
whether or not, of course.
Yeah, yours is
Because
canceled no matter
It's
what.
because like they already said it. It's not like, oh, it's not such a big storm. We're gonna reschedule.
See, my
school.
school's
It's
holding
not
out
like
for that.
Yes.
Right.
Christy, do you have any questions for Marcia's former students? Ilan, come over too.
Ilan, come
or
over
anything
here.
about inclusion from the point of view of a kid. And both of these boys have presented at an international conference on disability and inclusion. And
Oh,
they're
wow.
David
presenting-
C, not David.
right,
A.
and they're presenting again this summer. Ilan, come here.
Impressive.
So
That's
they
pretty
can
impressive.
field a few questions too about inclusion or
So tell me what your view is on inclusion.
Mhm. Well, inclusion is a great thing because like everybody gets a chance, and it's just like even like the kids with disabilities, they get a chance too. Like some people don't. Some people like the schools in Queens, they didn't think good about Elon, but but the kids in this district think he's gonna pass.
Okay.
We know he has already many years.
Yeah, he has passed.
Ilan, what do you think about inclusion and all the super hard work you had to do, especially in Miss
I
Richmond's
think
class?
it's paying off.
Okay, how's it paying off? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm not sure. It just pays off.
Okay, so even with all the hard work, do you enjoy school?
Yes,
And what's your favorite subject?
Jim.
Gym. After gym, how about academic subjects?
Math.
Okay, what's your best subject?
Math.
Okay. You want to tell Marcia how well you're doing in math?
Yeah, I'm doing well in math.
That's great. What are
Yeah.
you learning about? Is it geometry this year?
Yeah,
Is
I'm
that
learning geometry.
So what
what-
kind
Can
of
you,
topics?
can you do proofs?
Yeah, I've done proofs.
Wow. Awesome, Elon.
Yeah, that's great.
What are proofs?
Alon, tell us
Elon,
what
what
are
are
proofs.
proofs?
Well, I don't really know how to explain it.
Well,
I
it's
think
Like the word.
Say you know, have you learned yet, Aaron, that a triangle has 180 degrees?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
A proof is you have to find a way to show that all triangles, that a triangle must have 180 degrees, that it wouldn't be a triangle if it had 175 degrees or 190 degrees. And there are ways that you'll learn about things about geometry that you'll have to use to prove that something is true.
Well, I just thought of a good way. When I
Yeah.
make a right angle is 90 degrees, I put my finger like this. And it's
Uh-huh.
like if you make two of them, it's a triangle.
And 90 and 90 is 180.
Mhm.
That's true.
Hmm.
That's true. Okay.
Except you can't have a triangle with two 90
90
degree angles.
Well,
Then you
now
have-
it becomes three. This one is just one hole now.
Well, kind of, but you know
Okay.
what? You have to prove it on with pencil and paper. You
Oh
can't,
yeah, and
you can't turn your hands in. So,
oh yeah.
Okay, so I'm
Hang
going
on,
to
wait,
start to
stop,
let them
stop,
go. Yeah.
stop. Oh yeah. As you know, I've also been doing a lot of. I'm still
We'll talk to
doing-
her about that next.
All right.
Okay. Thank you guys. Okay.
Bye.
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 So do you have any other questions? And, even if you have questions next week, Marcia's very good about answering them. You can email them to me. I'll send them to her. I could give you her email. She's a
I
good.
have a question for both of you. Like, I feel like the one struggle that I'm experiencing in the class is just like classroom management. Like, do you have any specific tool that you use that like you could recommend for just classroom management?
Positive
grade are you
behavior
teaching?
support.
What'd you say?
Positive
grade?
behavior support. It's
Yeah.
anything positive. It has to be.
And I do notice that, like, for the kids, when I give them more positive reinforcement, it definitely, like, it's better. But I teach third grade. I'm an assistant teacher. So,
Okay.
uh-huh.
Again, positive. I used to set up just sort of a simple, send home a smiley face for the morning and one for the afternoon. I would set up certain goals that the child would achieve. For some kids, it was something simply at the end of the day, packing the backpack and showing it to me so that I knew that everything was really there. And if they did it all, they'd get a smile face, and hopefully the parents were on board making a big fuss.
Right.
If they wanted, they could bribe. They could. I wasn't averse to using money.
Yeah.
But basically, love is what does it. The hugs and the kisses, and I'm proud of you, and the absence of a reprimand when they don't achieve it. I mean, that was the hard thing to get parents on board with, is not to say a word. It's just don't say anything. They didn't do it, so they didn't do it.
And I have middle school, which is they're a little older, but a lot of what I do, I've actually learned from these people, even though I've taken all the classes. It's by watching and listening to them present at my class, but taking a student, I have a bunch of very difficult 7th grade boys, many with, I have 10 of them, and they all have IEPs. Our school, unfortunately, we're inclusive, but we level for math. So the weaker sections tend to be kind of self-contained special ed classes. And I didn't know how I was going to get through this year at the beginning of the year. But then I just, I found a time to give everyone something to do and just sit with each kid and talk about what their goals needed to be behaviorally, mathematically, and really form sort of you have to get them on your side. You have to be partners with them, and you can't ask them to do more than they can do. So, the one who was swinging by the door jamb, if he could sit for 3 minutes in the first week, I gave him a check, or I let him know that this was excellent. For someone else, that was ridiculous because they could sit for the whole class, but maybe they had to be more focused on their work, or maybe, they had to do their homework instead of not doing their homework. And they really, and Marcia's taught me this too, that kids understand that you can have different goals for different kids. But, it really took a couple of months until I got to each kid and communicated with the parents also, like, this is what your child needs to work on, and I'll let you know each week if they've gotten there. But they have to like you, and they have to know that you really want them to succeed, and you really, really believe in them. And, a lot of these kids came in saying like, well, I'm going to fail math. I always fail math. And, for me, I'm also, and it's taken me a long time to kind of get to a place where I could do it. But I with the one who they wanted out of the school, I could say to him, like, you remind me of my son. He struggles with math. He has an IEP similar to yours. And, he passed the algebra regents. Like, I know I can help you do this. And, I know that, do you want, he would say, I don't even want to go to college. And I'd say, but do you want to graduate high school? Like, what do you want to do? Well, then you need to graduate high school, and you need to get past algebra. So, I know I can do this. Like, and he's the one who, it's just amazing because he's jumping up and down now when he gets a concept. And he got a 77 on this test with percents and word problems, and he was crying. And I said, do you know how far you've come? Like, that you're crying because you got a 77, which is actually an amazing grade for anybody. I think it's fine. But, it's just, and it's not happening in his other classes. It's because of that,
Relationship.
Yeah.
The rapport.
and that's, I think, where it starts. And then, when I've had very rowdy, like full class, very rowdy classes, one thing that I found really helpful, which I learned from a Hunter student about 6 years ago, which she used in elementary school, but it works beautifully, is I have certain things, like I have 100% jar. I don't use it all the time, but for classes that need it, where if 100% of the kids all do the warm up, and again, it can't be like the whole class behaves for the whole period, because that will never happen. But if they all do the warm up, or if they all come in and they're in their seats by the time the late bell rings, I put a ticket in the box. If they all do the warm up, and then even if they don't do the warm up, I can say to them, okay, now we're having the 7-minute mini lesson. If nobody interrupts and nobody goes to the bathroom, it's 40 minutes, but sometimes you have to break it up, like
Smaller chunks.
And even for a kid, like, the kid always has to have a chance to redeem themselves. So if they're falling apart for the first 15 minutes, you have to sit with them and say, like, okay, so that didn't go so well, but I know you can do better in the next 5 minutes, and there always has to be. And then the next day, you've taught me this is like exactly what you say. It's a clean slate the next day. You're starting fresh, and you can't ever take it personally, because as you've said, these kids, if they could behave, they would behave. I'm quoting you. See how much I learn? But I tell you, class management.
Trust me, that was something that I got at a conference. That wasn't me. That was from a woman who herself had, I guess, and still continues to have Tourette's syndrome with severe ADHD. So she said, if I could have, I would have. I didn't want to not behave.
Right. and you have to really believe that they can do it. And, you know, that's something I don't know if I could, where I would have gotten that if I didn't parent a kid who also, you know, convinced almost every top doctor we went to that he'd never get past 3rd grade. Like, but now that I've seen that, like, I know, and it's absolutely true. I've never had a kid who has, you know, failed to grow in my class or get close to grade level ever. And, you know, we have a lot of kids that, you know, the teachers are pulling their hair out with, and it's really that simple. You just have to, and once you see it in once you see it in one kid, whether it's your own child or a child you teach, then you know that, that it can happen for other kids. And that, I think, keeps them going also.
They have to know that you like them.
Yeah.
It's really important. My son was a very hyperactive kid, and he once came home. I never knew when it was happening in it was actually 3rd grade, and he told me probably in 5th grade that he remembered when his teacher, that another teacher came in, and they were obviously talking about him, and she was pointing and making faces, and he was devastated.
Oh, that's awful.
It was just horrible. So and it's important for schools to place kids with teachers who will like them, because not all kids are easy, and some teachers are better with certain kids and other teachers are better with other kids. And it's really important to keep that in mind, not just to say the classes have to be even, you know, things like that. I'm trying to remember. I also often do certain metacognitive things where I get the kids on board with watching their own, you know, kind of being responsible for watching themselves, almost like catching themselves listening or paying attention. So after every 5 minutes, I'll give them a chart, and after 5 minutes, they'll kind of check off, do they think they're behaving?
Yeah.
The other thing is, Diane mentioned the tickets. I used to use tickets in my last few years before I retired. I switched it to toy money so that we were killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because they had to make trades. They had to trade their money, and then they would buy their treasures with money instead of with tickets, which really is a little more logical when you think about it. So it's, you know, it's just the cost of the play money. They don't get to keep it. You get to reuse it. So it was really, I found that they got much better with money much more quickly. That once I started doing that, it was great.
Do you have like a specific situation that you want, like, maybe you could
well,
give
I struggle in my class now because, you know, like, or I've struggled in my classes because, like, I'm an assistant teacher, so I don't really get much of a say. I kind of have to go along with, like, the management program of the teacher and stuff. So, you know, it's definitely difficult when the teacher has, like, a whole different view on behavior management, you know, where it's like, you know, the iron hand, you know, and
Are you the special ed person in the room, or are you?
No, I'm just an assistant teacher, just an assistant teacher. So this is
Okay.
even like my first year being an assistant teacher. But, you know, there's so many things that I would like to try, like positive behavior things and, you know, but whatever, I guess I'm learning what not to do, you know, as a teacher, right? And, but yeah, like, but she does give me the opportunity to teach, and like, I'm teaching math now, and sometimes in the lesson, there's a lot of kids who definitely like are very disruptive, you know, like singing. And I always wonder, like, okay, well, what do I do in this moment? Because then the other kids aren't able to focus. Right. And they're distracted.
You know what I used to do was I would, at that point, but you kind of have to explain to them. I used to do it the first time and then explain to them another time what I was doing. I would give somebody else a compliment. I love the way so-and-so is sitting quietly. And then hope that the other kid gets the hint. And if as soon as they're sitting quietly, I would say, oh, I love the way that person is sitting quietly.
So you would tell them ahead of time that that's what you were going to do?
Usually I would find, because I didn't use it unless I needed to for a class. So usually I would sort of start doing it, and it didn't always work immediately. So I would, at some other point when they were calmer, I'd get their attention and I'd say, did you notice that I said, I love the way so-and-so? Why do you think I might have done that? and try to get them to understand it. And usually we have to tell them because they're afraid to take those kinds of risks. That they might be wrong, whatever, even though that was my big thing was there's no such thing as something, as a wrong comment. There's a learning. A mistake is a learning. It's an opportunity to learn something new. Anyway, and then so I would explain to them, I'm going to kind of give you a hint about what I want you to do without embarrassing anybody, without telling somebody they're not doing the best thing possible, but I'll compliment someone else. Then the hard part about it in terms of management is then they look at you like, why didn't you talk to me? Tell me, I was also being quiet.
Yes.
My principal is
when
very
I explained it, I kind of said to them, I'm going to try to remember to pick different people each time, but I'm not going to waste time saying everyone who's doing the right thing. The idea is to help the person who's not doing the right thing.
Right.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
our new principal is very into positive behavior support, and is it Lee Cantor? He's very into behavior narration, but without the praise part, which is hard for me because I've always done it as you do it. I say, oh, I love how so-and-so is doing it.
Right.
So I've been trying it because he wants to see it when he walks in. And what it does is it eliminates that piece, because you're not saying, I love how Marcus is sitting. You say Marcus has taken out his work and he's ready to begin. So it's not like I'm saying he's better than everybody else. And it's interesting. So I was a little reluctant at first. I thought it would be sort of silly, but he calls it like just narrating the behavior. And you narrated.
You know what? There's been a lot of research lately about kids.
The problem with praise.
The problem with praise. And I actually had been reading about it maybe for 10 or 15 years, but I'm processing it as I talk to my grandchildren and tell them how wonderful they are every 5 minutes. And I'm sitting there and saying, oh my God, I'm hurting my own grandchildren. This is just a nightmare. So, because it's a very hard habit to break. But it really is, I do like the idea, because kids, in one of the most powerful studies I read, they took two groups of kids, gave them a very simple task, might have even been like a whisker task, like the performance things, but a simple one, and they all did well. And the kids, one group, they told them how wonderfully they did on it, and the other group, they basically just accepted it and said, oh, okay, and then they gave them a hard task. The group that had all the compliments couldn't get it together to do the hard test. They wouldn't even try because they were afraid they weren't going to get the compliments. And the other group was some of them were able to succeed on the challenging task, or at least try it. So that kind of is, so that's a real reason to do this Lee Cantor business, Diane.
The other thing that helps, and in elementary school it may be a little harder. As a middle school teacher, it's easier. Is to but if you have like a transition period where they're going out and coming in, or they're doing something else, is just to greet them all at the door. And and I started it a few years ago because I struggled. Class management was something I've always struggled with, because I'm very soft spoken and I'm smiley and I don't like to be mean. And so I've had to put together all these tools that I can do when I'm not mean, which turns out to be the kind of things you're supposed to do anyway, so it works out well. But at the beginning, when I was still having trouble, and the school, everyone in a school knows who is who can't control the class as well. The kids all know. So when I decided I was going to nip this problem, I would greet them at the door, and I would say, I also happen to be at a school now with very difficult kids, whereas in the past I was at schools with easier kids. I would stand at the door and I would say, are you ready and prepared to be in my class? I would be firm. I'd have like a firm message that I'd say to each kid, but something about connecting to each kid really helps. And now I don't say the firm thing. I just say, welcome to math. How was your day so far? Like very quick as they're walking in, but it sets the tone that they're coming into my space. And, it really has transformed these few things. I mean, it's still amazing to me because, I have been teaching for 27 years, but after 20 years, when I came to this new school, it was like being a new teacher with these kids. And now, I can have 28 kids in a class and not have a sound when I want them quiet. And then I can put them into groups, and it's nice. And there are these things you can do, but the door greeting is good because you get a chance to sort of see where each kid is that day. You can kind of tell already who's, and the other thing is like making some allowance. Like if a kid can't sit through, let them know what's acceptable. Like, I have one kid, like, he can't sit, so he would be lying on the floor and this and that. And I said, look, you can't do that. But if you want to go by the window and walk up and down for a few minutes in the middle of my lesson, I'm okay with that.
Right.
Like, find out what works for you. Or if you need to go to the bathroom, you don't have to ask, just go if you need that break, because you just have to decide what works. And yes, singing is not going to work, but if you need that break, because I have singers all the time, they love that. And you never know who's singing, but find something that they can do.
Okay, that's interesting.
You're okay with.
And do a lot with eye contact. Like I couldn't stand can I go to the bathroom? It's like it's a waste of time, number one. And it was so demeaning. If you need to go to the bathroom, you go to the bathroom. You can't abuse it, but if you need to go, you go.
We have a pass. We only have one out at a time. If the pass is there, they take the pass and they go, and then they come back, and that's it.
Exactly. Well, I used to do it. I didn't even, with little ones, they could leave the pass in the bathroom. I didn't even bother with
I have 3 plastic bags for my pass, because who wants to touch that pass? But,
Right. Yeah, that's another thing. So I would just have them make eye contact and point to the door. And they knew that they couldn't go out if somebody else was out. And they also knew that I really wanted them not to do it during teaching time unless it was an emergency. So, because lessons with the little ones are not that long. It's not full 45 minutes. So, I wanted them to try to sit for the 10 or 15 minutes and then they could go immediately. But if they needed to go then, they could. And they just kind of let me know, and I would know that it was an emergency, and I would know who was abusing it and talk to them. I found that work. I also used to on the greeting thing, I used to call it a toll. And so I would greet them. I'd say, good morning. How much is 7 plus 2? Or how much is, whatever we were working on. It was usually a math thing, but it could have been something we were working on in social studies or science. And each kid would get a different, very quick question. And then they'd go into the room.
I like that.
It's a quick way to kind of assess. It's also a way to let them know that some of the homework that isn't written is still homework.
Yeah.
Because that was always one of the things, like with my reading homework, that was why I did the compliments in web. And they never knew when it was going to be. I had a deck of cards that I'd shuffle each at the end I'd be at the end. And everybody would get a turn, and they never knew where they were in the pile. When we got to me, I'd share what I was reading, and then we'd shuffle again, and I'd put me at the bottom. So they had to do the reading homework because they never knew when it was going to be their turn.
That's good.
It was really because they need to have, I see with the kids I tutor, the parents can't always make them do things. And I didn't want the parents to have to fight with kids, certainly not over reading. Reading should be wonderful. Yeah. So you kind of diminish. I used to get the parents out of the system as much as possible. I'd say to parents, don't fight. If they don't want to do their homework, don't worry about it. I'll be the bad guy. It's okay. They'll do it with me. They will do it. Trust me, they will do it. But so.
Well, that was all helpful.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for coming.
No, this is great. Thank you, Marcia, so much.
You're very welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.
Sounds like you're going to be a great teacher.
I hope so. Thanks.
No, it sounds like you will. You're asking good questions, and you really want to do what's best for the kids, and that's
where to start. Because I see all your comments. They're just so articulate and well-rounded and well-balanced. So.
Oh, good. Well, I enjoy it. So thank you.
Sure.
That's great.
Okay, so stay safe in the snow tomorrow.
Okay, and I hope
That's
you get off.
Make
And your are so delightful.
Oh,
lovely. Yes.
What did you say? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said her boys are so lovely.
Oh, aren't they great? Yes,
Yeah.
They really are.
So
A treasure.
Yeah.
It's nice that all these years later, they had her in 2nd grade. And when I said, whenever I say I'm video conferencing with Marcia, they're like, when can we come down? When can we come down? We say, well, it's nice to be a teacher whose students remember you,
Definitely.
What, 5, 7 years later?
It really is. People don't realize how much, at Christmas time, people sometimes send these gorgeous, extravagant gifts, and I save the notes. Not that I don't appreciate
Yeah.
the gift, of course you do, but I save the notes
Yeah.
because I read them every once in a while. It feels so good. I once I was in Fortune Ops before it closed, returning something, and there was a woman there who looked at my signature and said, "Are you the Marsha Richmond who used to teach in Covert School?" And I cracked up. It was my very first or second year in Covert in first grade. Her daughter is now the head of cardiology at the Cleveland Clinic.
Wow.
No slouch. And she told me with something that I had said, how I called it right and helped them handle her. And I couldn't believe it. What I mostly couldn't believe, that as a 23-year-old or something, I had the nerve to talk. I had no kids of my own yet, that I had the nerve to say something. I said, I really said that at that age? How did I think I knew that? She said, I don't know, but you called it. You were right.
I know, see, look at that.
So that means a lot. Those are the things that I treasure so.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Good luck.
Okay.
All right, Diane, I will